Today, we're diving into the story of a man whose life became one of the 20th century's most defining struggles. We're talking about a lawyer, a revolutionary, a prisoner, and then a president. This is the incredible story of Nelson Mandela, a man who became a global symbol for sacrifice and reconciliation. We're going to walk through the key moments that shaped his long, long walk to freedom. You know, this single quote says it all. He delivered these words from the dock, facing a possible death sentence, and it just gets right to the very core of his philosophy. This was never about replacing one kind of oppression with another. No, it was about dismantling oppression itself. That ideal, it would guide every single thing he did for the rest of his life.
So to really understand the man, you've got to understand the system he was up against. Which brings us to Section 1, a system of division. We're talking about the monstrous system he dedicated his entire life to overthrowing, apartheid.
Okay, so when the National Party took power back in 1948, they didn't just encourage segregation, they literally wrote it into the law. The word apartheid itself means apartness in Afrikaans, and the goal was simple and brutal: to separate everyone in South Africa along racial lines and make sure the white minority stayed in power. And this system, it was total. I mean, this wasn't just about separate water fountains. This was a complete social and economic structure designed to control every single aspect of a person's life. The government was whites only, period. Black Africans couldn't vote. Entire communities were literally uprooted and forced into so-called homelands. And just to move around their own country, Black South Africans had to carry these things called passbooks at all times. It was an absolutely brutal, all-encompassing system of control. Section 2. The young revolutionary. Now, into this world steps a young lawyer, a man who actually came from the Thembu royal family, and he would soon become one of the system's most determined opponents. So Mandela's activism really starts with the ANC, and at first, he was all about nonviolent resistance, heavily inspired by Gandhi. He even led something called the Defiance Campaign in '52, encouraging people to deliberately break apartheid laws. But then, 1960 happened, the Sharpeville Massacre. Police opened fire on peaceful protesters and 69 people were killed. That day was a brutal, bloody turning point. It forced Mandela and the ANC to make a choice, a really, really difficult one. And this pivot was absolutely crucial. After Sharpeville, Mandela came to the conclusion that nonviolence just wasn't going to work against a state that answers with bullets. So, he and other leaders made the incredibly tough decision to form an armed wing, Umkhonto weSizwe, which means Spear of the Nation. Now, their strategy wasn't to start a civil war. No, the idea was to carry out acts of sabotage, like bombing power plants at night, to cripple the state without causing civilian casualties. Well, as you can imagine, this new path put Mandela directly in the government's crosshairs. And that brings us to Section 3, Prisoner 46664. This led to his arrest and the next absolutely defining chapter of his life, nearly 3 decades locked behind bars. So in 1963, Mandela and his comrades are put on trial for sabotage. It became known as the Rivonia trial, and it was this incredible moment of political theater, because instead of just defending himself, Mandela used the courtroom as a platform. He basically turned his own trial into a trial of the entire apartheid system. During a 3-hour speech from the dock, he laid out the ANC's vision for a South Africa where race didn't matter, and he concluded with these unforgettable words. For that, he was sentenced to life in prison. He only narrowly escaped the death penalty. 27 years. Just let that number sink in for a second. For almost 3 decades, the man who would one day change the world was completely locked away from it. And for 18 of those 27 years, his entire world was this tiny space on Robben Island. We're talking an 8 by 7 foot concrete cell. Damp, cold, with nothing but a straw mat to sleep on. The state's goal was simple: to break him. The forced labor in a lime quarry permanently damaged his eyesight from the glare. They wouldn't even let him attend the funerals of his own mother or his eldest son. But even in a place designed to crush the human spirit, his was unbreakable. In fact, he turned the prison into a center for liberation. He started what became known as the University of Robben Island, where prisoners taught each other everything: politics, history, philosophy. Incredible. By the late 1980s, the international pressure on South Africa was immense, and the apartheid regime was finally starting to buckle. This brings us to Section 4, Forging a Rainbow Nation. When Mandela finally walked free, he faced what was probably his greatest challenge yet, leading a deeply divided nation away from the very real brink of civil war. His release, it was a global event. The whole world was watching. And almost immediately, he began these incredibly complex and tense negotiations with the very man who represented the government that had jailed him, President F.W. de Klerk. It was this difficult, unlikely partnership that would ultimately dismantle apartheid and earn both of them a shared Nobel Peace Prize. Now, as presidents of a brand new democratic South Africa, Mandela knew that political negotiations weren't going to be enough. He needed symbolic gestures to start healing the country. And there was no symbol of white Afrikaner pride more powerful or more hated by black South Africans than the national rugby team, the Springboks. So what does he do? He uses the 1995 Rugby World Cup, which just happened to be hosted in South Africa, as his stage. First, he doesn't just show up to the games. He actively encourages the black population to get behind this team that they had every reason to despise. And then, for the final match, he does the unthinkable. In a moment that just stunned the world, he walks out onto the field wearing the Springbok jersey, specifically the number 6 jersey of the team's white Afrikaner captain, Francois Pienaar. This one single act was an absolute masterstroke of reconciliation. And hey, don't take my word for it. Listen to his former rival, F.W. de Klerk. He said that in that one moment, Mandela took a symbol of division and turned it into a powerful tool for unity, winning over millions of the very people who had once feared him most. But reconciliation, it wasn't just about symbols. It meant confronting the past head on. So Mandela's government created the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Now, the idea here wasn't revenge, not mass trials. It was something called restorative justice. Perpetrators of violence from both sides of the conflict could come forward, tell the whole truth about what they did, and in exchange for that truth, they could be granted amnesty. It was painful, it was controversial, but it was a vital step toward national healing. And that brings us to Section 5, the Mandela Legacy. So after all this, what is the ultimate legacy of this incredible life? Why does his story still resonate so deeply all over the world? Well, for one, Mandela did something very rare for a revolutionary leader. After just one term as president, he gracefully stepped aside. He dedicated his later years to philanthropy, focusing on the very issues his presidency had just started to tackle, especially the devastating HIV/AIDS crisis in South Africa. It just shows his commitment to serving others never, ever ended. In South Africa, he's known affectionately as Madiba. He's the father of the nation. But globally, he became something more. He became this universal symbol, a symbol of the belief that dialogue can overcome hatred, that peace is ultimately stronger than violence, and that justice is a cause worth any sacrifice. And that really leaves us with this one powerful question to think about. His story proves that history isn't just shaped by armies or economics, but by moral courage. It forces us to ask, how can one leader's radical, almost unimaginable vision of forgiveness, after so much personal suffering, truly reshape the destiny of an entire nation?